Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here is your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, greetings, my friends. Welcome to today's episode of the Todd Huff Show. It is my absolute pleasure and privilege to be here with you today. Let's see. I'm going to get into some things today that, I before the program, I was just sharing here behind the microphone. This is, there's occasionally things that I talk about on here that I don't feel 100% up to doing. And that's because they mean a lot, and there's a lot of details and information that I do my level best to stay on top of. But I some things I'm still figuring out. When you pursue truth, I think what's been revealed, what we've learned about how to live this side of heaven as a culture, as a society, as a people, as a government, as a state, a country, whatever. You can have a firm handle on those things, and then there's things that come up that are complex and difficult. And we're going to talk about one of those today, and that would be what is happening with these drug cartels. I want to do my best with Trump basically striking these folks with drones and so forth. And I want to go through this. I want to present this as fairly as possible. I want to explain the rationale for what Trump is doing and raise some questions that I think are fair, that I think all of us should ask, no matter who the president of the United States is. I also, time permitting, I did write about it yesterday in the newsletter because I told you I would if I didn't get to it. But I wrote in the newsletter yesterday, and if we have time today, I'll get into, on top of what's happening with the cartels and Trump's use of force here, I will also talk a little bit about his the plans to move forward with this ballroom. In fact, there's been progress made, demolition work to prepare the grounds for the new ballroom that has been that Trump is pushing for here. That's funded, by the way, not by taxpayer dollars, but by donors and by Trump himself. So that's where we're headed today, my friends. Thank you for taking this journey alongside us. Also, I will tell you, got home late last night. If you listened yesterday to the Toddcast, you will have heard me say that we went to the Pacers game last night, or we were going. Heck of a basketball game, double overtime. The Thunder have played 2 games. Both of those games have gone to double overtime. The Pacers came out shorthanded last night, losing in double overtime to the reigning NBA champions. And the Pacers they didn't play. I think their top 5, what I would consider point guards, were not on the court by the end of the game. So anyway, it was a good time and enjoyed it a lot, but I wish there was a different outcome. So that's where we're headed today, my friends, with the cartels and so forth. Let me say one more thing before I get started here. If you haven't visited freedommarketplace.net yet, I would ask you to do that. Part of the way that we're able to deliver this content to you free is to partner with people that want to put their business in front of you. These are businesses who are aligned with you from a ideological perspective. And these are companies, they have services and products that some of you in this audience undoubtedly could benefit from. So that's why we started Freedom Marketplace. FreedomMarketplace.net is where you can go. You can also go to ToddHuffShow.com freedom-marketplace. Well, you can just go to the website and you can find the main link there. But find out more information. See if you can support the folks who help bring this program to you on Freedom Marketplace. Freedom, I should say liberty and business for all, my friends. All right, let's talk about what's going on here with Trump and the cartels and these strikes that Trump is making against these cartels. And I think to understand the full scope of this, we got to go back a little bit in time, and we have to understand the drug crisis in America. Now, let me say this. So we know that this is a problem that has existed in this country for some time. And we first seek to understand. I know that there's opinions. Opinions happen immediately from some people. Some people, in fact, it's the opposite of what we do here. I like to, you'll rarely ever, you'll probably never see me trying to break news. That's not what we do here. We help people walk through the news and figure out how to best think about what's going on and have a conversation and a dialogue to put it into the proper framework and to try to understand it and to wrestle with some of these difficult sides. Sometimes it's very easy to understand and to know what the right side is. Other times it can be a bit complex, and this might be one of those times. And so it's been said, and I've said this on this program before, one of the signs of being an adult is to be able to entertain an idea without accepting it. I've noticed that many on the left can't do this. There's some on the right who can't do this as well. Actually, many people of all walks of life are incapable. I shouldn't say incapable. They're unwilling to do this. And I don't know if sometimes it forces people to be uncomfortable, to question some of their beliefs or their support of an individual person or party or politics or whatever. I think there's a lot of things that go into it. Sometimes it's just we live in a soundbite culture, but we really do try to dig deeper here to get to the truth. The core mission here at the Todd Huff Show is to help people hear and receive truth. Now, so we have to first understand the rationale for why we're here. So overdose deaths in this country. Now, the data that I have in front of me is from 2022. I don't know if that's the most recent. That's what I was able to find. Approximately 111,000 U.S. deaths in 2022 from drug overdoses, mostly from synthetic opioids. Synthetic opioid death rates, they have climbed. Listen to this. From approximately, this is in the past, it's over a course of 20 years, from 2002 to 2022. Listen to this. Synthetic opioid death rates climbed from about 0.4 per 100,000 in 2002. Today, or in 2022, the most recent data I have, shows that there are now, in 2022, 22.7 deaths per 100,000 people. Now, I don't have my calculator in front of me, but that's approaching 50 times, I believe. Oz, I don't know if you can do 0.4, do 22.7 divided by 0.4 and tell me what that number is. But that is a massive rate of growth from, yes, see what that number is. 56.7 times, 75 times more, 56 times more in 20 years. So from 0.4 to 22.7 per 100,000 people dying of synthetic opioid deaths, overdose deaths. Now, that leads us to, that this is all connected now. Now you think about the border, the war at the border, the open borders that we had under Biden. going back to Trump in 2015, 2016, build that wall, all this stuff, that meant a lot of things. But tucked into that argument was the illegal importation of some of these drugs that are undoubtedly killing citizens in this nation. Smuggling networks, cartels in Mexico and South America, of course, took advantage of U.S. southern border entry points and weaknesses. Trump's taken care of that in a lot of ways. The border is largely secure. It's not ever going to be 100% secure, but it is very, very close. I mean, it's 90+% secure, which of course proves that everything that they had told us in the media and on the left for the past, well, during Biden's entire presidency was not true, because Biden said he couldn't do anything. He needed Congress to fix the problem. That problem has been fixed. And so Trump has gone from a defensive sort of position where we're securing our border to now he's saying we're going to proactively and offensively target these people, target these groups who are trying to import drugs like fentanyl that are incredibly deadly, very dangerous, and that are killing Americans in the homeland here. So, there have been broader seizures of drugs by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. They say more fentanyl seized in the last 2 years than in the previous 5 years combined, or than the previous 5 years. And they have, that makes sense, right? Because we've got a more secure border, and it's just tighter. They're not able to get these things through like they once could. So they're trying to adjust. The smugglers are trying to adjust the way that they smuggle things into this country. United States of America, for all the problems that we have, is still for all things. If you think about take legal and illegal markets or products out of the mind for a second. If you think about people who want to really make a profitable living, legally or illegally, they would want to sell to the American people, because this is still the greatest economic engine on earth. And so they're trying to find ways to get this before the American people, get them addicted to the products. Now, I'm not trying to gloss over the personal choices that exist here, but sometimes these are very complicated issues. I mean, if you're raised in a house where your parents are doing drugs, some kids have a remarkable ability to see that and say, I want nothing to do with that. Others, heck, for all we know, others may have, of course, we know some of this is true, that some babies are born with addictions to drugs because the mother during pregnancy is taking drugs. So there's all sorts of factors here and difficult situations and scenarios. Obviously, human choice is a factor, but sometimes the environment in which we are raised. I know when I started running a nonprofit organization, I ran a Boys and Girls Club for about, I think, 3 years. And it was in my community. It was in the next community away from mine. I was in a small town. The town that the Boys and Girls Club was in, many people would consider a small town. My town was much smaller than that. But it was my community, right? It's where, when I was a kid, when mom said we were going into town to go to the grocery store or whatever, we would go to this town. And, I was naive because I was raised by two just amazing people. And I lived a bit of a fantasy childhood. Everything was good for me, and I didn't understand how bad it was for some other kids. I had a mom who stayed home. When I went to school, she was always involved in whatever was going on in the classroom. She was a homeroom mom or whatever they called them, involved in the PTA or PTO, whatever it was, just involved, and cared about us, was home all the time. We we just had constant access to my mother. My dad, of course, worked, but he would rearrange his working hours so that he could coach us. My dad was always the coach of our teams, and it was just a blessing. I didn't realize until I ran that Boys and Girls Club, and I was in my 20s. So you might think that that's a little naive, but maybe it was. But I remember as a young guy running that club, just being blown away by some of the circumstances that these kids had growing up that I never had to even remotely deal with. I remember a couple of brothers once, we had a program that we called the Shuffle. And this will date when this happened. This was in the mid 2000s, like 2006 to 2009, in that vicinity. We had this program. It was targeting teenagers. The reason we did this program was because the local law enforcement said, we're getting a lot of calls in this community where we're having to respond to youth that are, having law enforcement contact because they're doing things that require the police to be called. Is there something that can be done proactively here? There was a partnership formed with us, and we went into this community. And I love these kids. I had a great time, played basketball with them, did a bunch of things. I had cookouts there, got some of them to come from the club as well on other days of the week. But we would go one day a week and do the Shuffle. And we would have a drawing for an iPod Shuffle. That'll really date us. And so we had a grant to do this program. And so we bought a few iPod Shuffles. And every time you would attend, you would get a ticket that you would get to put in. And we would draw, I don't know, once a month or whatever, once a quarter. We did it at the beginning, but it didn't continue long. But we did it at the beginning. And I remember both of the brothers had won an iPod Shuffle. Several months later, they were asking me, they said, Todd, when are we going to have another drawing for iPod Shuffles? And I started to say, well, that was a grant. We don't have funds to do that right now, whatever the answer was. And I said, wait a minute. I said, you both won one. I said, what do you want other ones for? I was kind of teasing, having fun with them. And they looked at me and said, well, we had to sell our iPods in order to bail our mom out of jail. And that was perhaps the biggest eye-opener for me. There were lots of them, but that was probably the one that hit me the hardest between the eyes, because I had no idea that was the level of problem they were dealing with. And so some of these things run really deep, is my point. And it's easy to point the finger and say, well, it's all your choices. It certainly is. We're responsible for ourselves, but man, it's a lot easier having been raised in the way that I was than the way that some of these folks, maybe some of you were raised, not for comparative purposes, but just to understand that it's not always about trying to, just say it's just personal choice. It is. I'm not minimizing that. I believe that that's critically important, but sometimes before we fully understand things, we may have a lifestyle that's been thrust upon us that causes us to be, to have some really bad things in our lives, like these drugs. So that's the deal. That's kind of what's going, the backdrop to all of this. Now, in August, President Trump ordered U.S. forces to strike suspected drug smuggling vessels in the Caribbean near Venezuelan waters. And on September 2nd of this year, the first publicly acknowledged strike was, which was a boat linked to Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, which of course you hear about here, right? This is all connected to border security, the intentions of those evildoers in that country. Of course, they're all over the place. There's people that are born here that have really evil intentions, but this is one. These are not American citizens. They're trying to smuggle their drugs and violence across the border, get it in, somehow figure out the weaknesses. And Trump has gone from a defensive posture to saying, we're going to begin to take this to you. Now, he's done this, and I'll get more into this in the next segment. So let me give you the facts. But there's rationale. He didn't just wake up one morning and just say, hey, strike these boats or whatever. We'll get into that. But but I really want to give you the kind of the timeline here before we get out of this first segment. So mid-September, so a month or so ago, there were additional strikes that were reported, and they began referring to these, Tren de Aragua and people that were doing these things as narco-terrorists, which is important. Then earlier this month, the administration told Congress that it is in a non-international armed conflict, NIAC, with these drug cartels. Now, pause for a moment, because when I was first doing some research on this, I thought, what does non-international mean? It took me a minute, but the reason that this term is used is not because it means they're not happening outside this country. It means that it's not between two nation states. The cartels are not the Venezuelan or Mexican or whatever government. They have a lot of power, and maybe in some degree they are by proxy controlling the government, or at least heavily influencing the governments of their respective nations. But they're not nations, so it's not international. This is a different type of conflict. This is between a nation and a group that has been deemed or termed as a terrorist organization. October 8th, just a couple of weeks ago, AP reports Congress lacks hard public evidence that these vessels carried drugs. Questions have been asked about this. October 18th, which was just last week, Trump announces that the survivors from one of these strikes will be set for prosecution in Ecuador and Colombia. And then just a couple of days ago, on the 21st, just this week, Trump says that it's possible that there will be limited land operations to, quote, eliminate narco-terrorist infrastructure. So that's kind of the background. Got through what I wanted to get through here this first segment. Friends, you know one of the biggest challenges for conservatives like us is finding ways to ensure our values align with the things that we do, including how we invest. That's why I love what the team at 48 Financial is doing. They specialize in biblically responsible investing. That means they screen out companies that do not align with your faith, your values, so you're not funding things that go completely against what you believe in. Plus, they'll do all the heavy lifting for you, helping align your investments with your purpose, with your goals. The best part is that they will help you find out if your current investments, what you're currently invested in, reflects your values, or to what degree those things reflect your values. And you can take that assessment. It's quick, it's easy, it's painless, it's free. 48financial.com/Todd. That's the website where you can take that assessment. 48financial.com/Todd. 48 Financial, because your money should work, my friends, for your values. I have to take a time out. Sit tight. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Cruising right along here today. So we've gone through the timeline. We've gone through kind of the background, some relevant context regarding how we got here to Trump now issuing strikes against these narco-terrorist organizations from Venezuela in particular here. So what's the legal framework and justification and argument that's being had here? So let's go through that. I'm glad you asked. The Article 2, of course, of the United States Constitution, that is where the president, the executive branch, the president of the United States, is defined as the commander-in-chief. Commander-in-chief. So there is an immediate acknowledgement that the president of the United States has the ability and the responsibility, I would say, to order the military to do things that protect this country. Now, if you dig deeper, of course, in the Constitution and you look at the powers in the the legislative branch, they have the powers to declare war. So, but does every act of military intervention require a formal declaration of war? I mean, the obvious answer is no, and hear me what I'm saying. Some of you are certainly very much opposed to the president acting in any way with using military force. But at least in situations where our forces were directly attacked, surely we wouldn't have to wait on Congress to declare war. So there is obviously circumstances where military violence can be used that is not that doesn't require an act of war. Where that line is drawn, you might draw it right there. You might say, unless there is a direct attack, then we can't do it. Well, there's questions that could come from all levels of this, no matter where you draw the line. And that's where reasonable people here can have a disagreement on where this line should be drawn. The law of armed conflict, that says, well, the administration is treating the cartels as organized armed groups in a non-international armed conflict with the U.S. So they've said this is the justification. So they've cited certain laws and, well, justification for the things that they are doing. There's also this thing called the War Powers Act, which we've talked about on this program before, of 1973. The president must notify Congress within 48 hours of any hostilities, and then any forces that are used in these hostilities are not supposed to remain more than 60 days without congressional authorization. I think there's a built-in 30-day addition for the withdrawal of forces. But there are rules and laws on the books, but there are some questions, of course, when you go to implement or cite these laws as justification. And it's a healthy thing to do. That's another thing. It's a healthy thing, no matter who's president. It's a healthy thing to ask these questions because it is important that we follow the law and the Constitution of the land. But it's still, even in doing that, reasonable people can think that the line is drawn in a place that differs from one another. They might see the line being drawn in different places. So there's also the authorization for use of military force. The AUMF is what this is sometimes referred to. Congress has not passed any authorization for use of military force, in particular pertaining to these cartels. None of that have been passed, and of course, some lawmakers, some members of Congress, raise questions about this. Some people are political. Listen, there's different people. There's people who have legitimate objections. This would be people typically like Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, and there's others as well. There's some even on the Democrat side. But then there's political opportunists. There are people that no matter what they do are going to criticize what Trump says and make it into something no matter what the issue is. It reminds me, I may have told this story on here before, but back when I was a teenager, a younger Christian, we were having a youth group meeting. We were playing a game. It was a Bible trivia game. It was kind of like Trivial Pursuit. In fact, it might have been just like it, a Bible version. I can't remember. It's been 30 years ago, 30 plus years ago now. And I remember it was boys versus girls, and I remember there was a question that was asked on the card, and it said, the Bible says money. What does the Bible say about money? What does the Bible say about money? Something like that. And the girls respond. Now, let me pause. Whatever the girls were going to say, as a member of the other team, I was going to dispute it just because I was just having fun, and it's what you did, right? So even if it was right, I was going to try to find some technicality or just to try to keep them from getting the point, just to rile them up, have a little bit of fun banter, whatever. But, so in that sense, I was acting like Chuck Schumer, not obviously just in a playful way, but Chuck Schumer and the Democrats, many of the Democrats just oppose Trump, that they already know no matter what he says, they're going to oppose it. But when they answered the question, they actually got it wrong. And so I went from planning to object to no matter what they said to having a real objection because they answered that money is the root of evil. And I said, but back it up. That's not what it says. It says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It's the love of money. It's not money itself. Money is a moral, right? Just like, again, this is one of the reasons, one of the many reasons, but when people say guns don't kill people, people kill people, it's the way that the gun is used. It's the way that the human decides to look at and put to use some of these things that we have this side of heaven, from money to firearms to the way that we engage in free speech. You know, you can say whatever you want, but sometimes it's just wise not to say it. Sometimes you should just keep your mouth shut. Sometimes it doesn't mean you don't have the right to say it. It just means sometimes in a sane world, even though I have the freedom to say something, it's probably wiser, or maybe wiser in some instances, not to say it. And so I had a real objection there to the answer because it was wrong, but I was going to oppose it no matter what. So there are people that fall into both camps. There are people who oppose, that did both of what I was preparing to do in that example, that analogy. There are people who have legitimate objections, Rand Paul, Thomas Massey types. And there are people who, no matter what Trump says or does, they're going to have a problem because it's a pre-orchestrated sort of reaction and response. So, but Congress has not authorized the use of force, military force, specifically for this. There's also the Maritime Drug Law Enforcement Act of 1986. This gives U.S. jurisdiction over drug trafficking on the high seas, but traditionally for interdiction and arrest, not full military strikes. Terrorist organization designation, which is a big part of this, I mentioned in the first part of the program. Trump administration has designated major cartels as terrorist groups, which they're calling narco-terrorist organizations, narco-terrorists, and that is what is used to justify the use of force under self-defense and the law of armed conflict. So there is a justification laid out as to why Trump is doing this. I would say the responsible thing as people in this country who don't just get an opinion on something in 5 seconds and go out there and start posting or screaming about it as though we're experts in this, I think it's wise to ask these questions because there is a justification that Trump has laid forth, the administration has laid forth. The question is it sound? Is it airtight? Are there things that legitimately should prevent him from doing this? And it does matter. It absolutely does matter, while at the same time recognizing that he is trying to prevent what we talked about off the top, these massive drug problems that are killing Americans. He's trying to protect Americans. He's got what he thinks is a justification for this. Other people are screaming because they hate Trump. Some people are screaming because they have legitimate questions and concerns. I respect that group. I do. I respect that group. I have questions and concerns. But I wanted to go through this as fairly as I could today. Getting here to the end of the second segment, though, my friends, if you're dealing with discomfort or you're just tired of living off prescriptions and managing the side effects, you're not alone. A lot of folks are looking for something natural that they can trust. That's why I want you to check out Christopher's Organic Botanicals. That's a family-run natural kratom company rooted in truth, tradition, and transparency. They partner directly with farmers in Indonesia, and they lab test everything before it reaches your hands. No hype, no synthetics, no funny business, the real thing, done right. The key is that real kratom is safe when it's tested and responsibly sourced. I mean, kratom has a history of being used safely. The problem is when these shady sellers come in and introduce synthetic garbage that can hurt people. It's not even kratom, but it gives the industry a bad name because, again, they're operating under that name even though they shouldn't, and they're doing things that are harmful and that are very sketchy. And so Christopher's Organic Botanicals is trying to combat that and trying to do it the right way, my friends. Start with their Kratom Starter Pack. Use coupon code Todd Huff. You got to use first and last name here. Save 10%. Visit Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Quick time out, my friends. Back in a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Would it surprise you? Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. Would it surprise you that I don't know entirely where I fall on this issue? This is not the first time something like this has happened, where there's questions regarding the president's authority to use force. It won't be the last. Congress has tried to deal with this. They've put certain mechanisms and things in place to try to create clear rules, but honestly, the more rules there are, it seems like the more loopholes that exist, and it sometimes becomes maybe even more problematic or unclear as to where the actual goalposts are. It's one of the things. Who was the philosopher who said? I'm drawing a blank here, but one of the philosophers says, "Many laws, many lawbreakers." Basically, if you want to make a law about everything, you're going to have everybody end up breaking the law. And there's different types of laws, right? There's the moral law. So there are things that are against the law, that are against illegally in this country or other countries around the world, things that are against the law that violate the moral code. Those are laws you don't have to even tell people to follow. For example, murder. You shouldn't have to explain to someone legitimately. I never had a conversation with our children to sit them down and say, "Hey, murder is wrong." That's built in. That's built into the human conscience. We know this. The divine moral code. While we may not understand every detail, we do understand kind of the biggies, the Ten Commandment type things. So, but the more laws that you make that are administrative in purpose, that are not morally wrong, it's just, hey, this is the way the government does it, and if you do it a different way, you're going to face major consequence. You're going to be considered a criminal. Those are big problems because we don't have any way of knowing it unless we're experts in all of the pages of law that exist out there. And so that's a part of this. This is a country, we're approaching our 250th birthday, which will happen next year with Trump in the White House, which is going to be epic, by the way. But you look at this and you think, when it comes to rules and arbitrary rules and guidelines, it becomes complicated. You got a country that's been dealing with these kind of core questions in some capacity for a long time. You have different Congresses that have different perspectives. You have the general evolution of culture and society. You have presidents who push the envelope on these things, and it becomes murky. And I'll tell you, a big part of this, from my vantage point, is that Congress oftentimes, what's remarkable to me, they want to tell you that they can make equal pay for everybody on planet Earth for equal work. They want you to believe that they can control the sea levels in 5 years or whatever, but they won't do the things that are laid forth in the Constitution. Congress a lot of times says, look, we don't want to do that here. The president can do more of this or more of that. And it becomes more chopped up and convoluted. Then you've got terrorist organizations, which is obviously different, right? Different than fighting crime here in the country. When you're dealing with, for example, in a war, obviously when you're engaging with the enemy, you don't go up and give them their Miranda rights before you engage with them militarily. I mean, there's obvious differences, but then there's questions about where that line can be drawn. A lot of reasonable people can disagree. Congress, there's some senators out there who are pushing for a vote on this. That would include Rand Paul, who I do respect, and Tim Kaine and others on both sides. But there are those who have true questions and those who simply, and true concerns, and those who are just opposing the president because they hate him and all that. There's international law to concern yourself with. Some says the administration haven't shown the proof necessary for each target to show that it's met the criteria. And there's Trump, who's trying to prevent drugs from coming into this country and contributing or adding to the 111,000 people who die a year from overdoses. So I wanted to paint that picture today. And you know what? It's okay if you say, you know what? I'm not sure where I fall on this. I can see the concerns. What is wrong with that? I can see the concerns from both sides. We don't want a president who does things that's not permitted by law, but we also don't want a president to sit on his hands when he can do things to protect the American people, when he's following the steps and the law as laid out. I think this case can be made from either side. I think there's concerns legitimate concerns that abound on both sides. But I want to present it fairly today, my friends. I think I've done that at least to the best of my abilities. But I'm out of time here. Have you ever noticed how some families seem to have a plan that keeps their wealth and that lasts for generations? That is not by accident. my friends. Full Suite Wealth works with people who want their wealth to make a difference for years to come. Their team brings together high-level investment strategies like private equity, credit, options strategies, all these combined with expert legal guidance. It's all about making sure your vision becomes a reality for the people you love today and tomorrow. If you're looking to do more than just manage money, if you want to leave a mark and build something lasting, take a look at Full Suite Wealth, fullsuitewealth.com. That's fullsuitewealth.com. Jason and his team will take great care of you, build your legacy, secure your future. One more thing as we close, my friends. I talked about this on the Todd Talk today, but short version is there's some things that we're changing to try to bring the message of truth to as many people as possible. One of the things we're looking to do is have more guests. And so I'd like to know what you think. You can either email me, todd@toddhuffshow.com, or go to toddhuffshow.com/guests. Tell us who you think we should talk to, but I gotta go. SDG.